The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening, after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. What would it have been like? What would it have been like to be someone suffering from an incurable disease during Jesus' time? Or to have been a parent of a sick child? What would it have been like? What would it have been like to be a spouse or sibling of someone terminally ill in 30 AD? Imagine the desperation felt now by someone with a parent who needs an extraordinary amount of care, or by someone with a child suffering from some malady that has no cure. And then think about what it might have been like then. Today in this gospel, we hear about some of the lucky ones. While the Gospel of John tells us that Jesus worked many signs and miracles that are not recorded in Scripture, there is no reason to believe that Jesus cured all the sick in his time. There were many sick that Jesus did not cure. After all, the space that he covered through his travels wasn't all that large. He kind of walked around the same territory repeatedly. And his time on earth was very short. He cured a few, but he did not cure all. There isn't even much reason to believe that he healed all the sick that he did come across. That's why I'm surprised now when people look at many good people who are not cured and see in that a vulnerability of faith's claims. But Jesus didn't heal all the sick people he came across even when he was on earth. Why would we expect it to be any different now? Nor did Jesus eradicate any type of disease from the earth. He didn't even remove any diseases from Jerusalem. And some doctors today, working without miraculous power, can almost surely eclipse the number of cures that Jesus tallied. You have almost certainly been in buildings and even churches with doctors responsible for curing more people than Jesus. Compared to them, Jesus' healings don't seem so extraordinary. What we have with Jesus is just a small sampling. Well, then what was the point? What was the point of Jesus' sporadic and few healings? What would they matter if they're barely a blip on the battlefield of sickness and disease? And of what value are they to us? Jesus' healings happened so long ago in a brief stretch of time and came to an abrupt and perhaps ironic end when his own people when his own people put a miracle worker to death. And the miracles, after all, were part of the problem. That praise and adulation, the following Jesus around, clamoring for his attention, a whole town gathering at his door, all of that would come to an end, and so would the healings with the cross. We should not forget that the miracles had their part to play in hastening Jesus' death. His miracles attract believers, and the authority he gained vis-a-vis the Pharisees and the scribes were in no small part due to the miracles. He could heal, they could not. Ironically, the miracles were part of why Jesus had to go. But where were all those people he had healed and their families when Jesus was led away? Why were they not there to defend him? Have you ever felt unappreciated? Have people ever showered attention on you only to use you and forget all about you when they are through? Have you ever felt bitten by the very mouth you feed? Sometimes I think that the gospel and Christianity as a whole really isn't about fantastic works or angels or churches or even prayer. If you look closely, the gospel is about the emotional storm of human life throughout the ages and the account of one person who stayed faithful and constant when he had every reason not to do so. I think that most people would aspire to be that kind of person, at least some of the time, constant and faithful even when they had no reason to do so. And I think that even more people would at least want someone like that kind of person in their life. So what's the purpose then of the healings? They didn't do us or Jesus, ultimately, much good. Many point to the witness value of the miracles, and that view goes something like this. Jesus was no physician or shaman of the ancient world. He accomplished his work with a greater than human power. That attracted attention, and that attention signaled to those who saw him that there is something different here. The healings themselves were witnesses. They testified throughout Jesus' environs that he was no ordinary person. But if that was the point of the miracles, witness value only, surely he could have worked something even more spectacular. Why not walk across the sea in broad daylight in front of the crowd instead of only a small group of disciples? Why not transport somewhere the very mountains that Jesus said a mustard seed of faith could move? Orchestrate a dance of the stars, shift the sun and the moon, something like that. Scare people. Nothing works like a credible threat. Frighten them into faith. That would have fixed even the Pharisees. Now, I've never been really comfortable, although that was what I was taught, I've never been really comfortable with the explanation that the miracles were merely signs of testimony. They were relatively small in number. They were limited. But they play such an important part of the gospel that the miracles must be more than just a mark of identity or witness value only. The miracles must be more than merely a way that Jesus told the world that he was the Son of God. The reason I say that is because witness value alone doesn't answer the question of why the public miracles have come down to us as healings. Now, understand what I mean by that. There are other miracles in the Bible. The changing of the water to the wine at Cana, the multiplication of bread and fish, and the feeding of the 5,000. But most of the miracles are what? Personal healings of one individual. Jesus, one-to-one, healing another single person. Jesus could illustrate other works of power to reveal his identity that would have been much more convincing. It's more than coincidence that he most regularly chose to manifest himself through the means of curing other human beings one at a time. So I think that the miracles were signs of something, but not just of who Jesus was, but what he was ultimately looking to do in the world. Now understand what I'm trying to figure out here. The Gospels often record instances of Jesus working miracles. Teaching and working miracles basically describe everything he's recorded as having done in the years leading up to the crucifixion. Most of those miracles, the vast majority of those miracles, are healings of individual persons. But yet Jesus doesn't, through those healings, eradicate any single disease or illness, even for his own time, even for his own country. So what then is the point? Now, the answer often given is that the miracles were designed to communicate to the world that there was something special, and that hints and speculation about his being the Son of God were on the mark. But I want to say that there is more to it than that, because that explanation doesn't answer the question of why he chose to heal individual people. If it were signs of divine power that he had been after, he could have chosen far more awesome sights than the healing of common sick folk. I think that the healing miracles were signs of something, but not merely signs of Jesus' identity or his power. They were symbols of a much more substantial, if more subtle, healing that Jesus wants to work on the inside of the human soul. Consider the first reading, part of the dialogue of Job. Job looks at life and says, "Is not life on earth a drudgery?" There is probably no more depressing reading in the church's calendar than the first reading we heard this morning. Is not life on earth a drudgery, filled with getting up, going to work, and doing it all over again? As it was for Job, it is for us today. And the things that we enjoy are all too fleeting, and those that cause us trouble are not escapable for long. And time goes by more quickly than we recognize. Life is like wind, Job says, and it oftentimes blows away our happiness more frequently than it bears good news. There are two things: the weight of the disappointments that we have of ourselves and the knowledge of the trouble we cause others, and the burden of life's anxieties that suffocate our happiness and threaten our hope. We cannot avoid either disappointments and anxieties. We cannot avoid either entirely. But we sure ought to struggle on earth to try. That struggle causes illness, a mental or spiritual, psychic kind of sickness that plagues us all. This is the kind of illness that Jesus aims to cure, not just in one particular time and place, but always through the vehicle of his ministry. And his healings were signs of that underlying intention. In other words, what I want to suggest is that much of Jesus' life is understood in signs and symbols, and they were not frightening because he wanted us to have choice, and fear mitigates choice. And the healings, as well as the casting out of demons, were signs of the physical healing of a deeper, more consequential, and lasting healing that Jesus came to address. Consider the cure worked at the beginning of this gospel, Simon's mother-in-law. Simon's mother-in-law would surely get sick again and eventually pass away. That healing was of quite limited duration. And the same is true of all the other nameless people Jesus is recorded as having cured in the gospel. None of them are walking around today. Aside from the people who were offered some very temporary relief, the healings have no value apart from the fact that they were signs of a permanent healing that Jesus offers to work in us all. And this healing is not fictitious. It's not merely a spiritual healing, as if it had no purchase in the here and now. The healings of grace manifest itself in an integrated life, one healed of anxiety and regret, one that bears witness in how we act, both to others and ourselves, how we spend our own time, how we direct our thoughts when we are alone, keeping our mind pointed toward the things that free us from worry and remorse, healthy, with both steps firmly marching off to heaven. The bad news is that Jesus declined the option to become an uber physician. He didn't set up shop and take in all the sick. And we are left to wonder why he didn't. I think the reason is that because there is much more at stake. The only illness that can have a lasting threat is the kind of a spiritual variety. Without a cure for that, the physical healing, any physical healing, just delays the inevitable. Simon's mother-in-law escaped her fever, but her time would come. The healings in this gospel offered some respite, but all those healed would face death again. In the end, for the folks cured in this gospel, their faith would be little different than those who were not among the lucky few in the 1st century A.D. And after Jesus goes off to a deserted place, Simon tells him that everyone is looking for you. Is that still true today? I think there is good reason to believe that is becoming less true, if indeed it is still true at all. Why is this so? Is the world no longer in need of healing? It is a spiritual illness that lies at the heart of any lasting burden in this life. And for that, there is only one cure.